So Lane Kiffin's the head coach at LSU. You've probably heard that by now. One of you asked a question earlier today. Daryl from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, go Eags. He said, how surprised were you about the LSU AD sounding off on Brian Kelly in defense of the Lane Kiffin hire? I mean, I don't know that Verge Asbury needs to defend the Lane Kiffin hire, but the context is Verge was talking with USA Today about Brian Kelly. But he wasn't mentioning BK by name, but he was doing the whole juxtaposition thing of here's where we were, here's where we are now. And so he spoke a lot about Lane Kiffin embracing Louisiana, embracing dealing with donors, basically doing what you have to do. If you're paying a guy 8 figures to be a head coach, you can't resist being a head coach. Being a head coach is more than, drawing it up on the grease board, hiring a staff, recruiting. You got to work the scene, man. Sometimes your plate's more full of that than it is football, but that's what you got to do. So Verge Asbury was talking to USA Today. Do we have that quote, Jesse? And he said some things that you asked me if I was surprised. I don't know who in the world would be surprised at this, but here's one of the quotes. Quote, he's not one who, he's talking about Lane Kiffin. Quote, he's not one who'll say, okay, I don't want people to contact me. I don't want people to touch me. I don't want people to be around me. That's who we had. That's why we got what we got. There was no feel, there was no connection between the LSU football program, the coach, and the fans. He's right. There wasn't. There wasn't. You're listening to someone here that was really high on Brian Kelly when he got hired. And I started to cool on Brian Kelly in the years after that, and people started to notice it on the show. Like some LSU folks would hit me up pretty consistently. There were like half a dozen of you who would say, well, why are you selling on us? I thought you were high on Brian Kelly when we first hired him. I was. Then I started to get feedback from inside LSU. And you know what the feedback was? It had nothing to do with Brian Kelly's acumen as a head coach. It had nothing to do with anything football related. The number one criticism by a mile when they hired him down there was he is not only not embracing Louisiana, he is like actively resisting Louisiana. And it just boggled my mind because that was the last thing that I thought would stand in the way. But it goes back to the spectrum of tolerance that I've talked about a lot on the show. There is a spectrum of tolerance for a head coach in college football. And the more you endear yourself, which should be like the minimum requirement to be a head coach, the more you endear yourself, the more you embrace the culture at LSU or the University of Washington, the more you move the needle on the spectrum of tolerance. So the theory was, and I'm right on this, if Brian Kelly was rattling off playoff seasons and undefeated seasons, he could be the biggest jerk in the world. Hey, quick time out here. Are you subscribed to the channel? It doesn't cost anything. It's free. Please do it. It helps us maintain the show at this level. That's it. That's all I got. Back to the clip. He could despise the colors purple and yellow, and it wouldn't matter as long as he won. But the second it got crooked, and it did, there was no equity. He never built an ounce of equity with the LSU fan base. And I would say I don't know why. I do know why, or at least I have a pretty good working theory as to why that I'll float you in a second. But it was the most baffling feedback when you started to get it. You didn't want it to be true. But, I mean, like 24 sources on it. They're not all lying. They're not all coordinating to sabotage what at the time was their current head coach. But look, guys, I don't want to rehash this because it's history now, but there were people in that building that lost their jobs when Brian Kelly took the job that made no sense. And it almost got to the point where it felt like he was flushing every bit of Louisiana outside of that building just to prove a point. And I think, and this is kind of my working theory on it, I think Brian Kelly thinks a lot of himself as a head coach. Now, you can think that's ego, and it is, but it's not without merit because Brian Kelly had won a lot of football games. I just think Brian Kelly took that job and said, I've been really good at Notre Dame. What I think can get me over the top is taking a job at a place where I can get a higher caliber of athlete, whether that's true or not. I think that's what he thought. And I think he went down there and said, I don't need to do all this. I'll fake an accent for you, but I don't need to embrace this. This place needs to embrace me. I'm the winner. I'm the one who's won for a long time. I've done this stuff my whole career. I'll do it here. And I think it got to a point where that became such the mentality that when he listened to people from Louisiana talk about how he needed to embrace Louisiana, it almost became radioactive to him. And it almost became like a point that he was going to make to prove to people, no, that's not what makes this place special. Having the right head coach is what makes this place special. I'm the right head coach. You guys think that some uniqueness of the culture down here is why we'll win? I'll show you. I'll just resist all of it. I'll flush it all out of the building. And he did. And people noticed. And if he would have backfilled it with rock stars, then it would have been one thing, but he didn't. And they lost too many games, and he got fired. That was the long and short of it to me. I always enjoyed being around Brian Kelly. Like, I never had a bad interaction with him. But at the same time, that's one of the premier jobs in college football. And this is the part that's mind-boggling. Each major program has unique elements to it. And it's your job to embrace them. If you don't want to embrace them, don't take the job. The worst thing to do is take the job and then not embrace the culture, especially when that culture is LSU's, which is awesome. How do you take that? I want the LSU job, but I don't want anything to do with Louisiana. Like, how stupid is that? How crazy is that? So that's why it failed. And Verge Asperger's just pointing out the obvious. Maybe if you live in Boise, Idaho, and you weren't paying attention to it day to day, week to week, that's a little bit of a surprise. That's not an eyebrow-raising quote at all. That's a tame description of what the experience was like down there under Brian Kelly. Look, for all I know, he'll get another head coaching job and apply the lessons learned. I know some folks at Notre Dame who feel vindicated and who think that's a fool's errand to ever expect otherwise. But that's why it didn't work at Louisiana State University. You know what disgusts me, Jesse, is people trying to expand something just to make money. Okay, that disgusts me. Now, we move on to this news. We have expanded the store at patestateMaterial.com. Even today, we have added new items because we want to make more money. Hey, at least we're upfront about it. However, I am happy to report to you that in adding more items to the store, we have not diminished the value of the items that were already in the store. Don't ask me to explain it. That's just the way it works. So the other day, we were doing some research on the show, just to give you a backstory on why this hat says depth over dopamine. You probably don't need a backstory. I mean, that makes good sense. It's a good life philosophy. But the reason we have it in our store is we got a little AI generation. We get a little AI report every now and then. We just want to know how the robots out there describe our show. Okay? I know how Jesse sees us. How does Claude see us? We just ask every now and then. And so, you know what they said, Jesse? It said, whatever. It said that our audience, the retention rate is off the charts for our genre or any genre, which is true. You guys watch an insane percentage of these shows. I appreciate it. AI has taken note too. And it describes our audience as an audience that chases depth over dopamine. Our audience, probably not just endlessly scrolling through shorts feeds, for example. Maybe some of you do. But apparently when you come to our show, you're chasing depth over dopamine. Now, I thought to myself, we could pay a marketing department who knows how many hundreds of thousands of dollars to come up with slogans, or we could just slap that on a hat and a T-shirt. We chose the latter. So we have slapped that on hats and T-shirts, and that's available along with the Football is Coming line, which for 2 weeks in a row is our best seller. And that was, as best I recall, a 50-50 collab idea between Jesse and I. I think that's the way that went. It doesn't matter. Look, as long as all the money goes into the proper coffers, it doesn't matter whose idea it was. Yes, everybody's smiling. Therefore, everyone agrees with that philosophy.